The flashes of light illuminated the entire banquet hall as if it were daytime. I pulled my hat down low, pulled my mask up a bit, and held the recorder steadily in my hand. The press pass hanging around my neck was bought from a scalper for 30,000 yuan. The photo on it only looked about 30% like me. But no one gave me a second glance at the security checkpoint. After all, there are 50 or 60 media outlets present today who would pay attention to a female reporter wearing a mask. The launch of Goose Group's new product was an outrageously extravagant affair. A giant screen in the center of the banquet hall played Goose promotional video on a loop while business tycoons and suits stood beneath crystal chandeliers, the clinking of champagne glasses echoing incessantly. I squeezed into the third row of the media area surrounded by photographers carrying long lenses and microphones. I heard that President Gu is going to announce some big news today. A spectacled reporter whispered to his colleague. What big news wasn't the new product already revealed? It's not about the product. It's a personal matter. An acquaintance of mine revealed that President Gu is going to introduce someone to the public today. My heart clenched suddenly. We've been married for 3 years, and Gu Sihing has never mentioned me in public. Our wedding was held abroad with only close relatives invited, and not a single photo was leaked. His social media accounts are full of work updates with absolutely no trace of our family life. Everyone knows that the Gu Group has a young and promising president, Gu Zihin, but no one knows that he is already married. No one knows who his wife is. I gripped the recorder tightly, my knuckles turning slightly white. The stage lights suddenly dimmed and spotlights shone directly on the center of the stage. The host, microphone in hand, raised his voice 8 octaves. Let us welcome Mr. Guiheng, president of the Gu, with the warmest applause. Applause erupted like a tidal wave when Guiheng walked out from the side of the stage. My heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He was wearing a navy blue handmade suit, and the tie was the dark gray patterned one I gave him last year. Tall and slender with a cool and aloof look. The lights on his face made his features appear sharply defined as if sculpted by a knife. He walked to the center of the stage, nodded slightly, and a perfectly curved smile played on his lips. 3 years have passed, and he hasn't changed at all. She still maintains that perfect image in front of others. Thank you to all the media friends and partners for coming to Goose's new product launch. Guiheng began, his voice deep and powerful. An entire banquet hall fell silent instantly. He briefly introduced the technical parameters of the new product, while the giant screen behind him simultaneously displayed demonstration footage. Reporters typed furiously on their keyboards, and flash bulbs went off, one after another. I didn't hear a single word because I noticed that behind the curtain on the right side of the stage, there was a woman in a white dress, Linu Guiheng's secretary. Instead of her usual black business suit, she wore a simple yet exquisite white dress, her hair styled in a delicate low bun, and 2 round pearl stud earrings adorning her ears. I bought those pearl earrings on my first Valentine's Day after getting married. Guiheng said he lost it. It turns out it wasn't lost. After all, it was just worn on someone else's ears. I bit my lower lip with my teeth and tasted a hint of blood on my tongue. After Gu Siheng finished explaining the product, he paused and his tone softened at the end of the press conference. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce someone to you all. A commotion broke out below. The reporters exchanged excited glances, while the photographers aimed their lenses at the side of the stage in the past 3 years. The Gu family has been able to get to where it is today without the support and companionship of one person. Gu Siheng turned to the side and stretched out his hand towards the curtain. She is the most important person in my life. The white skirt swayed gently. Lin Yui in her high heels walked step by step to the center of the stage and placed her hand in Guiheng's. She lowered her head slightly, her face showing just the right amount of shyness and sweetness. Like a carefully nurtured white lotus, Gu gripped her hand tightly, faced everyone below the stage, and said in a clear and firm voice, "This is my wife, Linu." Boom! It felt like a muffled thunderclap exploded in my ears. The world fell silent for a second. All the sounds receded like the tide, leaving only the image in my eyes. Gussie Hing held Linui's hand, the two standing side by side under the spotlight like a perfect couple. And I stood 3M away in the media area, wearing a mask and a baseball cap, holding a voice recorder in my hand like a clown. "Mrs. Gu is so beautiful. Mr. Gu and Mrs. Gu are such a perfect match." So, President Gu was secretly married all along. He really kept it a secret. Compliments rang out one after another. Linui blushed and shyly hid behind Guzihin. Gussie Hen turned his head to look at her, his eyes so tender they were almost dripping with affection. That look, he never gave me that look at home. For 3 years, more than 1,000 days and nights, the way he looked at me was always polite yet distant, as if he were looking at a guest he had to entertain, a business partner he needed to maintain appearances with, or a decoration placed in the living room. The only thing that didn't seem like he was looking at his wife was I even thought I was born to be treated this way. I thought Gussie was just that kind of person. Cold, restrained, and not good at expressing himself. I made up countless reasons for him, telling myself that this was just his personality, that it would get better with time, that it would be better after he finished this project, that it would be better once everything stabilized. I waited 3 years. What awaited him was him holding another woman's hand, and in front of everyone, calling her Mrs. Gu. It felt like an invisible hand was gripping my chest tightly, making it hard to breathe. My hands started to tremble, first my fingers, then my entire arm, and finally even my shoulders were shaking. It's not fear, it's anger. It's the kind of anger that once it ignites can burn all reason to ashes. The host on stage leaned over with a beaming smile. "Mr. Gu and his wife are truly a perfect match. May I ask when you two got together?" Gue Han glanced down at Linui, a smile playing on his lips. 3 years ago. 3 years ago. We got married 3 years ago. Therefore, from the very beginning, our marriage had a third person living in it. Linua took the microphone, her voice as soft as cotton candy. "Se Hung has always been very good to me. No matter how busy he is these past 3 years, he always makes time for me. I feel really lucky to have met such a good man." A chorus of envious sighs erupted from below beneath my mask. The corners of my mouth slowly curved upwards. It's not a laugh. It's that kind of curve where, after being driven to the brink, you stopped caring about anything else. I took off my hat. Then he pulled down his mask. I put the recorder in my pocket, stood up from the 3rd row of the media area, and stepped toward the stage. The surrounding reporters were bewildered by the sudden appearance and turned to look at me. Guy Hung on stage was still smiling at the camera, his demeanor composed and dignified. Linua linked arms with him, almost pressing herself against him, her face adorned with the blissful smile befitting Mrs. Gu. I stood still, 3 meters away from the stage. Then he opened his mouth. "Guehen." My voice wasn't loud, but the entire banquet hall fell silent instantly because my tone was too calm. So calm that it didn't sound like a reporter, but more like I was calling out the name of one of my own people. Guy Hung's body stiffened abruptly. He turned his head, his gaze passing through the crowd and landing on my face. In that instant, I clearly saw Guy's face turn from normal skin tone to deathly pale. That face which would never falter even in the face of a collapsing mountain. That face that could effortlessly win in the business world now resembled a paper doll drained of blood. His pupils contracted sharply, and his lips moved as if he wanted to say something. But no sound came out of his throat. Linua also saw me. Her smile froze on her face, and the hand holding Guehin's arm tightened uncontrollably, her nails digging into his arm through the fabric of her suit. But Guehan didn't notice at all. He just stared at me intently, his eyes turning with horror, panic, and fear. Yes, It's fear. He's afraid of me. The entire venue was completely silent. All the cameras and all the eyes were focused on me, and Guy hung on the stage. The air was taut like a string about to snap. I looked at his pale face and smiled. Honey, my voice was light and airy, like a feather falling into a stagnant pool. Didn't you say you would never reveal your private affairs in this lifetime? Whoosh! The entire banquet hall erupted in chaos. Chapter 2. The Shin family's daughter. These words were like a bomb, sending the entire banquet hall into chaos. Husband. She calls President husband. Then who's that on stage? What on earth is going on? The reporters went crazy, their cameras flashing between Guiheng and me. A few quick-thinking ones were already frantically tapping on their phones. The news had probably already spread to Weibo. Guiheng stood on the stage, his lips trembling. His usually eloquent mouth was now as if glued shut, and he couldn't utter a single word. Linua's face turned from pink to ashen, then to ashen. She was still holding Gussie's arm, but her posture was no longer as demure as before. She looked more like a quail that had been frightened into submission. Madam, please do not disrupt the press conference. The host was the first to snap out of it, frantically gesturing to the security guards below the stage. Security, where are the security guards? Take this troublemaker out. For security guards in black uniforms rushed out from the side and headed straight for me. The surrounding reporters automatically made way for me. No one spoke up for me. They simply held up their cameras, excitedly filming the sudden farce. To them, this was a huge news story, far more interesting than Goose's new product. 2 security guards grabbed my arms, one on each side. Madam, please cooperate and leave. The security captain lowered his voice and used subtle force to try to drag me out. I didn't struggle. I just stood there letting them pull my arm, my eyes fixed on Gussie hung on the stage. Gussie hung finally came to his senses. He didn't look at me. His first reaction was to turn his head and whisper something in Linua's ear. Linui nodded with a grim expression and then hurriedly left the stage, surrounded by staff. He was protecting her from beginning to end. He protected her. When the security guard saw that I didn't move, he tightened his grip even more. My shoulder was twisted painfully and my bone cracked. Guiheng, I spoke again, my voice calmer than before. Are you sure you want someone to drag me out? The veins on Guiheng's hand, which was gripping the microphone, bulged. He stared intently at me, his eyes swirling with complex emotions. Fear, anger, panic, and something else I couldn't decipher. His lips moved as if he were about to speak. The banquet hall doors were suddenly pushed open from the outside. The 3M high-carved gate slammed into the wall with a loud bang. Everyone's attention was drawn to it. An elderly man in a dark gray Sean suit stood at the door. His hair was gray, but his back was straight, and his brows exuded an air of quiet authority. Behind him were 6 bodyguards in black suits, their steps perfectly synchronized. I recognized the old man, Uncle Chin, the chief steward of the Shin group. He's from my mother's family 18 years ago. He came to the Chow family once, wanting to take my mother and me back to the Shin family. My mother didn't agree, so he never came again. But I remember his face because when he left, he put a piece of candy in my hand and said, "Young miss, if you need anything, come to the Shin family and find this old servant." I was only 7 years old then, and I didn't know what the Shin family was. I only knew that the candy was very sweet. Get out of the way. Uncle Chen's voice wasn't loud, but it was deep and powerful, echoing throughout the banquet hall. The security guards looked at each other in bewilderment. Guihen's expression darkened further. He clearly recognized Uncle Chin, the butler of the Shin group, who in the upper echelons of the business world didn't know him. Uncle Chin, leaning on his cane, walked towards me step by step. The bodyguards automatically parted the crowd, and a clean and efficient passage led directly from the doorway to me. Uncle Chin stopped in front of me. He glanced at me, and his cloudy old eyes suddenly reened. He slowly bent down and bowed 90 degrees to me, his posture as respectful as if he were addressing his master. "Young miss, this old servant is late." 6 words spoken softly, yet each one was clearly audible to everyone present. The entire banquet hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I was stunned. The 2 security guards who were holding my arms let go as if they had been burned, staggered back several steps, and their faces drained of all color. "Mississippi, Mississippi," the security captain stammered, his legs trembling. Uncle Chin straightened up and gave him a cold look. That look carried the imposing aura accumulated over 3 generations of the Shin family, and the security captain immediately buckled at the knees and collapsed to the ground with a thud. "How dare you touch the daughter of the Shin family?" Uncle Chen's voice suddenly rose, and his cane slammed heavily on the floor. The 6 black-clad bodyguards behind him stepped forward simultaneously, their imposing presence like 6 walls pressing down on them. The security guard scrambled back to the corner, wishing they could shrink to the size of ants. Guy Hing's face on the stage was no longer white, but bluish. It was as blue as a dead person. He stared intently at me, and finally, genuine horror surfaced in his eyes. "You're from the Shin family." Gussie Hing's voice was Hersero, as if it were being squeezed out of his throat when he married me 3 years ago. All he knew was that my surname was Chow, that I came from an ordinary family, and that my parents ran a small business. He married me because the Chow family's business happened to fill a gap in the Gu family supply chain. In short, it was a business marriage. He never knew my mother's surname was Shin. I never knew that my mother was the eldest daughter of the Shin family, who ran away from home back then after my mother married into the Chow family. She severed all ties with the Shin family. She didn't want a single penny from the Shin family and never mentioned anything about them until last month when she was seriously ill and hospitalized. She held my hand before she passed away and said, If you ever suffer any injustice, go to the Shin family. Although your grandfather is gone, your uncle is still here. The door of the Shin family will always be open for you." I didn't go to the Shin family's house. I originally wanted to resolve this broken marriage on my own, but Uncle Chin arrived. He must have heard that Gussie Hung was going to announce Mrs. Gu at the press conference and guessed what would happen. Uncle Chin turned around, pointed his cane at Gussie Hung on the stage, and said in a voice as cold as ice shards in the dead of winter, "Gussie Hung, you really have a lot of nerve." Gussie's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He was the president of the Gu Group, a prominent figure in the business world. But compared to the Shin family, the Gu Group was like a toddler just learning to walk. The Shin Group controlled 1/3 of the country's financial assets with branches in over 20 countries worldwide. A true behemoth. And I am the only granddaughter of the Shin family. My maternal grandfather only had 1 daughter, my mother, and my uncle never married. I am the only child in the 3rd generation of the Shin family. I have never told Gahin these things because I thought marriage didn't require these things. I thought sincerity was enough for 2 people to be together. I thought my status was an added bonus, not a bargaining chip. I was wrong in the circle. Status is everything. Uncle Chin walked up to me and bowed slightly. "Mississippi, the car is waiting outside." I nodded, then turned around and looked at Gussie on the stage one last time. He stood frozen in place like a tree struck by lightning, unable to move. The spotlight was still shining on him, but the confident and charismatic CEO from a moment ago was gone, replaced by a man consumed by fear. He opened his mouth as if to say something. I didn't give him a chance. I turned around, took Uncle Chen's arm, and walked out of the banquet hall step by step under everyone's gaze. The moment I stepped out the door, a barrage of flashes erupted behind me. The reporters finally snapped out of their gaze and frantically pressed the shutter, as if they wanted to etch this moment into their camera's memory card. The sun is shining brightly outside. A black Rolls-Royce was parked in front of the hotel, the door already open. A young man sat in the driver's seat. his profile as sculpted as a sculpture, his hand resting on the steering wheel, his posture relaxed yet dignified. He turned his head and met my gaze. Those eyes were as deep as a cold pool, revealing no emotion. "Ryu," Uncle Chin said, "take Miss back to the Shin family." The man named Ryu nodded slightly, his voice as calm as a breeze. "Get in the car." I got into the back seat the moment the car door closed. I glanced out through the tinted window. Gussie rushed out of the hotel entrance, his suit disheveled, his tie askew, and stood on the steps looking around. He's looking for me, but it was too late. The car silently glided into the traffic. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. 3 years is enough. Chapter 3. Throwing out the divorce agreement. It was already dark when the car entered the Shin family manor. The Shin family manor was larger than I had imagined. The car drove through the main gate and along the winding driveway for a full 5 minutes before stopping in front of a 3-story Chinese-style villa. The courtyard was filled with sycamore trees, their fallen leaves carpeting the ground. In golden hues, Uncle Chin opened the car door for me and said in a low voice, "Mississippi, we're home. I'm home." These 3 words sounded a little unfamiliar to me. In the 3 years since I married into the Gu family, Gui Hen has never said "I'm home" to me. When he comes home, he always acts like it's all business, changing his shoes, eating, going to his study, making phone calls, and even when he sits on the sofa in the living room, he's at least 2 people away from me. I got out of the car and looked up at the brightly lit mansion. 2 rows of servants stood at the door, bowing in unison. "Welcome home, miss." I was startled by the scene and instinctively took a half step back, bumping my back into someone's chest. I turned around abruptly and saw Romy standing behind me holding my bag. "Be careful." He lightly touched my shoulder, then quickly let go and stepped back to a polite distance. "Thank you," I said. Ryu didn't reply, but simply nodded slightly and walked past me. Into the villa, he walked casually, his hands in his pockets, acting more like the owner than a first-time guest. Uncle Chin explained from the side, "Young Master Residential Building, which is separated from Miss Rome's place by a garden. Young Master R." He also had the surname R. In the west wing of the Shin family's house lived a young man surnamed R. Before I could think any further, a maid trotted over and stopped in front of me. "Miss, your luggage has been delivered to the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. Madam's room was on the 3rd floor. Would you like to go and see it first?" My mom's room. My heart ached. My mother passed away 3 months ago from late-stage liver cancer. When she died, Gussie Hing used a business trip as an excuse not to come see her one last time. I stayed by her side in the ward for 3 days and 3 nights, finally holding my mother's hand and watching her close her eyes. Where was Linua then? Probably at some party. Armin, armed with Guihen, smiling like a pure white lotus. I won't go yet. I took a deep breath, suppressing the bitterness that welled up inside me. "Uncle Chen, could you please prepare a divorce agreement for me?" Uncle Chen's eyes lit up for a moment, but quickly dimmed again. He asked in a low voice, "Has the young lady made a decision?" "It's decided." "Okay, I'll have someone take care of it right away." The Shin family was much more efficient than I had expected in less than 2 hours. A divorce agreement was placed on the coffee table in front of me. The agreement was 15 pages long with every clause clearly written, including property division, stock repurchase, and damages for defamation, with the amount for each item accurate to 2 decimal places. Shin's legal team has reviewed it, and there are no loopholes. Ryu reappeared at some point, holding a cup of tea and leaning against a pillar in the living room, his voice indifferent. I looked up at him. He certainly didn't seem like an ordinary guest, someone who could mobilize. The Shin family's legal team couldn't just be an idle person staying at the West Building. But at that moment, I had no mind to inquire about his identity. "Thank you." I signed my name on the last page of the agreement, the pen tip leaving a deep scratch on the paper because I pressed too hard. Uncle Chin put the agreement into a file folder and asked me, "When does Miss plan to send it over now?" "I'll go with you." Rome put down his teacup and picked up the car keys on the table. I frowned. "I can do it myself." "I know you can." Romeo had already walked towards the door, leaving without looking back. But the Shin family's rule is that a family member cannot go to war alone. It was already 1000 p.m. when the car stopped in front of the Gu family villa. The lights in the villa were still on, and I could see shadowy figures moving around in the living room through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat in the car for 30 seconds, then opened the door, grabbed the file folder, and strode towards the entrance. Romeo didn't get out of the car. He rolled down the window, rested his elbow on the window frame, and said lazily, "I'll wait for you outside. Call me if you need anything." I nodded. The door wasn't locked. I just pushed it open. The scene in the living room made me pause for a moment. Guy Hing sat on the sofa, his suit jacket off, his tie hanging loosely around his neck, looking like a lump of mud with its bones removed. Lin Yui sat beside him, holding a tissue and wiping away tears. Upon hearing the door open, both of them looked up at the same time. The moment Lin Yui saw it was me, her tears flowed even more fiercely. She stood up abruptly, her voice shrill and piercing. "You still have the nerve to come back. Do you know what you've done to Si Hang?" The press conference was completely ruined. Goose stock price dropped by more than 10 points this afternoon. I ignored her. I didn't even glance at her. I walked straight to the coffee table and tossed the file folder in front of Guzahan. The folder landed on the glass coffee table with a crisp thud. Signed. 2 words. Clean and efficient. Guy Hung stared at the file folder without moving. His hands were on his knees, his fingers clenched into fists, his knuckles white. After a long while, he finally reached out, opened the folder, and pulled out the agreement inside. He read the first page. Then his expression changed. "Xiao Yuan." He looked up, his eyes red. "Are you serious? Do you think I'm joking?" Gusi Hing slammed the agreement on the coffee table and sprang up from the sofa. He was a head taller than usual, and his sudden movement created a sense of oppression. He stared intently at me, his chest heaving and the veins on his neck bulging. 3 years. His voice was terribly Horsero. 3 years of marriage, and you just want a divorce. I looked at him. I had never looked at this man so intently before. His eyes were red, not in a fake way, but in a deep, raw red with blood vessels rising to the surface. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and the lines of his jaw were taut like a violin string about to snap. He was unwilling to accept it, but what right does he have to be resentful? "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Tell me, in these 3 years, how many public occasions have you brought Lin Yui to?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "How much have you bought her? Houses, cars, jewelry, and that supplementary credit card still has no spending limit." "Right." His face turned pale again when you called her Mrs. Gu at the press conference. "Did you ever think that you had a real Mrs. Gu in your family?" When I said these words, my tone was completely flat. I wasn't questioning or accusing. It was like reading a report, listing the facts one by one. But the calmer I was, the paler Guihang's face became, because calmness means indifference. Lin Yue suddenly rushed over and snatched the agreement from the table. Her eyes were red as she quickly flipped through a few pages, and her expression changed drastically when she saw the property division clause. "Are you crazy? You want to take 30% of the Gu family shares? Xiao Yuan, do you even deserve it? That's my dowry." I looked at Lin Yue, a slight smile playing on my lips. "Dowry. Understand, it's something I brought into the Gu family, not something the Gu family owns. It's only right that I take it with me now." Lin Yue's lips trembled. She turned to look at Guzahan, her eyes brimming with tears. "See, look at her. That is us enough." Gusi Hing interrupted her. He bent down, picked up the agreement from the coffee table, and read it through again from beginning to end. His fingers trembled slightly, and the way he turned the pages carried an indescribable heaviness. Then he raised his hand, and right in front of me, tore the stack of agreements in half. The sound of tearing paper was particularly jarring in the quiet living room. He tore it once, then a second, then a third, until he had ripped all 15 pages into a pile of shreds, which were scattered all over the floor. White scraps of paper fell on the dark wooden floor like a light snowfall. Goose Hun looked up at me, his eyes red as if they were about to bleed. I won't get a divorce. He squeezed out the 3 words through gritted teeth. No matter who you bring up, I won't get a divorce. I looked at the scraps of paper at his feet and chuckled. The laughter was soft and brief, but it sounded exceptionally clear in the spacious living room. Guy Hen. I looked down and pulled out an identical agreement from my bag, placing it on the coffee table. You can tear off this one. My legal department has an electronic copy. The notary office has a photocopy, and the court has a record. You tear off 1 copy, and I'll print 100. Guy Hing's body swayed suddenly as if he had been punched in the chest. His lips moved, and after long while he managed to squeeze out a sentence. Are you really that heartless? Heartless. I pondered those 2 words and found them somewhat amusing. You brought another woman to the press conference and called her Mrs. Gu in front of the whole world. I brought up divorce and you call me heartless. I didn't look at him again. I turned and walked towards the door, my high heels clicking crisply and resolutely on the floor. I paused when I reached the door. There was no turning back. Sign the document within 3 days. Otherwise, Shin's legal department will come to talk to you. I stepped out of the villa, and the night breeze carried the fragrance of osmandus blossoms from the courtyard. I took a deep breath and felt the weight that had been pressing on my chest for 3 years finally loosen a little. Rome was still leaning against the car. When he saw me come out, he raised an eyebrow. Sign. Tear it up. Romeo chuckled and opened the car door. I expected this. Let's go. We'll find a different way to get him to sign tomorrow. I got into the car and glanced back through the window. The curtains in the living room were partially drawn back. Goosey Hing stood by the window, looking at me through the glass. His face was deathly pale in the light, like a drowning person watching the last piece of driftwood drift away. I looked away and leaned back in my seat. The car started and drove into the night. Chapter 4. The Mistress Comes to Protest. The next morning, I was woken up by my phone vibrating. A number without a name was displayed on the screen, but I could recite the digits with my eyes closed. It was Guy's private number, unchanged for 3 years. I stared at the screen for 5 seconds, then closed it. He called again. I turned it off again. I answered the phone on the 7th call. Chao Wen Guihen's voice was as if he had been up all night. Where are you? What's it to you? My voice was still from just waking up, but my tone was already cold. I waited downstairs at your place all night. You weren't there. He paused, his voice lowering as if squeezed from deep in his throat. You really went back to the Shin family. I threw back the covers and walked barefoot to the French windows. The moment the curtains were drawn back, sunlight flooded in, making me squint. Outside the window stretched the vast grove of plane trees at the Shin family manor, a golden expanse, completely unlike the few half-dead ornamental trees outside the Gu family villa. Guy Hen, you have 2.5 days left. I hung up the phone and promptly added his number to my blacklist. When I came downstairs, Romy was already sitting in the dining room. A cup of black coffee and a sandwich sat in front of him, and he was flipping through a financial magazine. His posture is relaxed, as if he were at home. Seeing me come down, he closed the magazine and nodded to the maid. The maid immediately brought out a breakfast, a fusion of Chinese and Western dishes, which filled half the table. There were crystal shrimp dumplings, crab roast yumi, a bowl of steaming wontons, and a cup of freshly ground soy milk on the side. Uncle Chin said, "You didn't eat last night." Romeo picked up his coffee cup, looking at me over the rim. "Eat something first. You'll be better prepared for battle." I had just sat down and picked up my chopsticks when Uncle Chin strode in, his face looking rather grim. Mississippi, there is a Miss Lin outside who wants to see you. Miss Lin. My chopsticks paused for a moment. She still dares to come. Let her in. I put a shrimp dumpling in my mouth and chewed slowly. Uncle Chin hesitated for a moment. Her belly looks a bit big. I swallowed the shrimp dumpling, took a sip of soy milk, and then said, "Let her in." When Linua was let in by the maid, I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing makeup today. Her face was bare, and her eyes were red and swollen. It was hard to tell if she had been crying or if she had used eye drops. Her hair was unkempt, hanging loosely over her shoulders, and paired with her white dress, she looked utterly pitiful. What's most striking is her slightly protruding belly. She was about 4 or 5 months pregnant, and her dress was stretched into a rounded shape. She held her waist with one hand and protected her belly with the other, walking very slowly and carefully, as if afraid that others would not see her belly. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze sweeping from her stomach to her face and then back to her stomach. The corners of his mouth unconsciously curved slightly. "Sister Xiao," Linui said, her voice trembling with tears. "I know you hate me now, but the child is innocent. The child in my belly is Si Heng's flesh and blood." Romeo put down his coffee cup and watched the scene with great interest, completely adopting a spectator's attitude. I didn't say anything and put another shoe into my mouth. Seeing that I didn't respond, Linua's tears flowed even more fiercely. She wiped her eyes with a tissue, her voice choked with sobs. "Sister Xiao, I didn't get together with Sahang on purpose. We truly love each other. Please, please let us be together. The child needs a complete family." I remained silent. He simply took his phone out of his pocket, unlocked the screen, and opened a file. "Say what you just said again." I showed her my phone screen. "I'm recording you. It's okay. Go ahead." Linua's expression changed, but she quickly regained her pitiful look. She covered her face, her shoulders shaking. "Sister Chow, I know you hate me, but you can't force feelings. CI doesn't love you anymore. What's the point of you dragging this on? You might as well get a divorce and go your separate ways." "How many months old is the baby?" I finally asked. Linui was taken aback, clearly not expecting me to ask that. She quickly recovered, placing her hand on her belly, a maternal glow spreading across her face. For months. I repeated the 3 words, then chuckled. "I came to the Gu family villa once 4 months ago. That night, Gue Han got drunk and kept calling out your name." Linua's eyes lit up and the corners of her mouth couldn't help but turn up. But she was too happy too soon. I stood up holding the soy milk cup and walked over to her, looking her up and down. She was a head shorter than me, and even with her pregnant belly, she was completely overshadowed by me. "Linu, do you think I would negotiate with you without being prepared?" I unlocked my phone again and opened another file. An audio clip begins to play. Linu's voice came through the phone, accompanied by the noisy background noise of the bar. "Faye, let me tell you, that woman surnamed Xiao is a complete idiot. Does she think Gussie Hen really likes her? Dream on. I'm only after the Gu family's money. Once I asked her and get pregnant, the Gu family's fortune will be secure." Another female voice. "Is that belly of yours real or fake?" Linu's voice. "Of course, it's a real belly, but the child isn't Guihang's. It's my ex-boyfriend's. Anyway, Guihen doesn't know. We'll talk about it after the baby is born. We'll just say it was premature." By this point in the audio, Linui's face was as white as a sheet of paper. She froze on the spot as if she had been struck by lightning, her eyes fixed on my phone, her lips trembling, unable to utter a sound. I pressed the play button again. It was replaced with another recorded call. Linu's voice. "Mom, don't worry. I have that Gu guy completely under my control. Once he divorces Xiaowen, the position of Mrs. Gu will be mine. At that time, everything in the Gu family will be ours." A middle-aged woman's voice said, "Be careful. Don't let Chia Yuan find out. Linu left. She's an idiot. For 3 years, I've been flirting with her husband right under her nose, and she hasn't noticed a thing. A stupid woman like that deserves to have her husband stolen. I turned off the recording. The restaurant was eerily quiet. Ryu put down his coffee cup. His gaze fell on me, and he raised his eyebrows slightly. When did you record this? Linu's voice had completely changed. It was no longer the soft, sobbing tone from before, but a sharp, piercing hoarseness. I put my phone back in my pocket, sat back down in my chair, picked up my soy milk cup, and took a slow, deliberate sip. You're Guihing, secretary. So, you should know that all official phone calls at Goose are recorded. Right, that's a rule, Guihing said himself. You probably forgot about that when you made personal calls from your office. Linu's face was no longer white, but ashen. It's a kind of bleakness that comes from being hollowed out inside and out. I've already sent this recording to the Gu Group's board of directors. I put down my cup, picked up a tissue, and wiped my mouth. By the way, your ex-boyfriend was detained in Macau last week for gambling. I had him bailed out. The price was that he handed over all your chat logs and transfer receipts. Linua swayed twice and stumbled backward. Her hand instinctively grabbed the edge of the table, preventing her from falling directly to the ground. You, she pointed at me, her fingertips trembling like leaves in the wind. When exactly did you start investigating? 3 months ago. I stood up, walked up to her, and looked down at her. You probably don't know that before my mother passed away, she handed over the power of the Shin family to me. You also don't know that your ex-boyfriend, Shintao, is a distant relative of a branch of the Shin family. The day he recognized you, he told me everything about you. True fear finally surfaced in Linui's eyes. She loosened her grip on her stomach and shrank back like a mouse cornered against a wall. I took half a step back, giving her room to turn around. Now you can go. Oh, by the way, I gestured with my chin toward her belly. I hope you can keep it a secret from Guiheng when you give birth. Linui shuddered and abruptly turned to run outside. She ran very fast, not at all like someone 4 months pregnant. The frantic clutter of her high heels on the marble floor echoed for a long time in the empty hall before fading away. I watched her figure disappear through the door before I sat down again. The servant brought over another basket of steaming, hot shrimp dumplings. Romeo leaned back in his chair, his hands crossed on his knees, a faint smile playing on his lips as expected of someone with a Shin family bloodline. I picked up a shrimp dumpling and took a bite. The shrimp meat was fresh, sweet, and bouncy, completely different from the half-dead breakfasts at the Gu family's place. There's more to come. Guihan's board of directors is probably in an uproar. I copied that recording to 7 directors, including his uncle. Ryas' smile deepened, and he picked up his coffee cup, raising it towards me. It's like offering a toast. Chapter 5. The scumbag begs for forgiveness. When Guiheng arrived at the Shin family manor, it was pouring rain. I'm curled up in my study on the 3rd floor, flipping through the photo album my mother left behind. The cover is yellowed, the edges are frayed, and the old photos inside give off a faint, musty smell. One of them is a photo of my mother when she was young, wearing a floral dress, standing under a sycamore tree, her eyes crinkling with laughter. Behind her stands a man whose features resemble mine by about 50%. He must be my uncle whom I've never met. Uncle Chin knocked on the door and came in, his expression somewhat subtle. Young Miss Guiheng has arrived. My hands didn't stop flipping through the photo album. Let him go back. He was kneeling outside the gate. I looked up and glanced at Uncle Chin. Uncle Chen's expression was complicated, a mix of disdain and anticipation. Romeo, who was standing behind him with a cup of tea in his hand, raised an eyebrow upon hearing this, walked to the window and pulled back the curtains to look down. He actually knelt down. Ryas' tone was as if he were commenting on the cooking time of a dish. The rain was quite heavy and his suit was completely soaked. He looks quite convincing. I closed the photo album. got up and walked to the window outside the grand iron gates of the Shin family manor. Gai Hin knelt upright in the rain. He wore a white shirt with 2 buttons undone at the collar and sleeves haphazardly rolled up to his forearms, looking like a drowned rat soaked to the bone. Rainwater streamed down his hair, and the soaked shirt clung to his body, outlining the slightly trembling contours of his shoulders. His car was parked nearby, doors wide open, headlights still on. The windshield wipers swung back and forth, leaving 2 pale streaks of light in the darkness. The rain was really heavy. Raindrops splashed on the ground, creating a white mist, and the iron gate's railings were washed clean by the rain. Goosey knelt there, his knees soaked in the puddles, his eyes fixed on the manor. I looked for 3 seconds, then lowered the curtains. Make him kneel. I sat back down on the sofa and turned to the next page of the photo album. Tucked inside was a picture of me on my 7th birthday. The candles on the cake were crooked and my mom was holding me, smiling in her arms, showing my gap to front teeth. Uncle Chun and Romeo exchanged a glance and quietly slipped out as the study door closed. I heard Romeo whisper something outside, his tone tinged with amusement. The rain outside was getting heavier and heavier, and the sound of rain pounding against the window was deafening. I flipped through the entire photo album, then flipped through it again. Then I lay down on the sofa in the study, closed my eyes, and listened to the rain. The rain was loud but calm, unlike the quiet in the Gu family villa, where the silence was suffocating. The quiet here was reassuring. Uncle Chin came in again and whispered that Gai Hung was still kneeling. The butler held an umbrella for him outside, but he pushed it away. I didn't say anything. I woke up at 2:00 in the morning. The rain had lessened, turning into a fine drizzle that pattered against the window like a veil. I walked to the window and drew back the curtains. Goosey was still kneeling there. He seemed to have all his strength drained away. His upper body swayed. His lips were purple from the cold, and his face was deathly pale. His hands were braced against the ground, his knuckles an unnatural bluish white from the exertion. His knees were probably numb, and his body involuntarily leaned to one side, which he forcefully pulled back. He looked up and gazed through the rain at my lit window. His eyes reened. It wasn't the red from crying, but the red from blood vessels bursting open after pushing yourself to the limit. His lips moved, and although I couldn't hear what he was saying from dozens of meters away, I could tell he was saying, "I'm sorry." He kept repeating it over and over, like a wind-up machine that couldn't stop. I drew the curtains and picked up my phone to call Uncle Chin. Let him in. When Duce was carried into the living room by 2 servants, he could no longer stand. His knees were completely stiff and his legs dragged straight on the ground like 2 frozen logs. When the servants placed him on the sofa, he shivered and rain dripped down his trouser legs, soaking the floor. Rome reappeared at some point, leaning against a pillar in the hall, holding a fresh cup of hot tea. I had the maid bring a dry towel and threw it on Gui Hen. 5 minutes Gussie Hing took the towel but didn't wipe himself. He looked up at me with his wet face still clinging to his eyelashes. It was hard to tell if it was rainwater or something else. Yuan. His voice was so horsero it was almost inaudible, as if his throat had been sanded. I was wrong when he uttered those 3 words. I felt no emotion whatsoever. It's been 3 years I've been waiting for those 3 words for 3 years. When he ignored me, I waited. When he stood me up, I waited. When he didn't reply to my messages, I still waited. I've been waiting for the day he would turn around and look at me and say, "I'm sorry for making you wait so long." But he didn't. He waited until the 3rd year, until I made him a trending topic, until I sent a recording of his office to the board of directors, until I drove his mistress to the brink of despair before he finally remembered to kneel at my door and apologize. What did I do wrong? I took the towel back from his hand and wiped the rainwater off my fingertips. I shouldn't have brought Linu to the press conference. His voice was broken, his teeth chattering from the cold. I shouldn't have let her appear as Mrs. Gu. I was just confused for a moment. Ewan, please give me another chance. A moment of confusion. I interrupted him. I walked up to him and looked down at him. He was soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, and he looked extremely disheveled. Guy Hen, you made her your secretary 3 years ago, right after you got married. You started taking her to private dinners 6 months ago. 3 months ago, you took her to the Malda under the guise of a business trip. At the press conference, you held her hand and called her Mrs. Gu, with hundreds of people in the audience watching the media, broadcasting it live, and millions of people watching online. I counted them one by one on my fingers, my voice so steady that even I was a little surprised. Which of these things was momentary? Which one was foolish? Guy's face turned completely ashen. His shoulders slumped. His hands clenched into fists and then relaxed. Relaxed and then clenched into fists again. He opened his mouth several times, but no sound came out of his throat like a fish that had been washed ashore. Finally, he lowered his head. His forehead almost touched his knees. I will break up with her. His voice was muffled as if it came from underground. You give me a chance. I will break up with her completely. I will not sign the divorce papers. Looking at his bowed head, I suddenly remembered what my mother had told me before she left. Ewan, the thing I regret most in my life is that I tolerated your father's first foolish act. I thought that I would just tolerate it once, and it would be over. But he spent his whole life telling me that if you tolerate it once, you have to tolerate it for a lifetime. Never give a man a second chance. Because the only difference between the second time and the first time is the hurdle of self-deception. I took my phone out of my pocket and opened a video. When the screen lit up, my fingers unconsciously gripped the edge of the phone. That video was taken 3 months ago in my mother's hospital room. Tubes from various medical instruments extended from her body like a dense spider web. Her face was so thin it was unrecognizable, and her eye sockets were deeply sunken. But her eyes were still bright, and she looked at me with a smile. I stood by the hospital bed, phone in hand, dialing once. No answer. Twice. No answer. 3 times. Still no answer. On the 7th try, the call finally connected. I said into the phone, Gussie, my mother is dying. Could you come to the hospital? There was music, a woman's laughter, and the clinking of glasses on the other end of the phone. Gussie's voice came through. I'm with a client. We'll talk later. The call ended. I held my mother's hand in mine. Her hand was so cold it scared me. With great effort, she raised her hand and touched my head, smiling as she said, It's okay. Mom's not in pain. By this point in the video, my hands were already shaking. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the sofa. Gussie hung froze. His eyes were fixed on the phone I had tossed on the sofa, his pupils shrinking to pinpoints. He clearly recognized the time, his own voice, and his own ruthlessness. His lips moved several times, and finally, a genuine breakdown appeared on his face. That phone call. His voice cracked into fragments. The client that day was. It's Linui's birthday party. I said for him. Gussie Hin's shoulders trembled violently as if a sledgehammer was pounding on his back. He raised his hand to cover his face, and tears seeped through his fingers. The living room was so quiet that only his suppressed breathing could be heard. Romeo emerged from behind the pillar and placed the empty teacup on the coffee table. The bottom of the cup tapped against the marble surface with a crisp sound. Mr. Gu, let me see you out. The tone was polite, but the meaning was anything but polite. When the servants helped Gussie hang out, his knees still wouldn't bend and his legs dragged on the ground, leaving 2 wet marks on the polished marble floor. As he reached the door, he suddenly turned around to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with tears indistinguishable from each other. His lips parted as if to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. The door closed. The iron gate slowly closed. In the night, I heard the car start. Then the beam of the headlights swept across the window, getting farther and farther away, and finally disappearing into the rain. Romeo turned to look at me, and handed me the towel. Only then did I realize that the hand holding the towel had been trembling. It's not that I'm cold. It's that the emotional aftershocks from watching that video haven't subsided yet. Well done, Rome said. His tone was flat, not like he was offering comfort, but more like he was stating a fact. I nodded and folded the towel, placing it on the coffee table. The rain outside the window had completely stopped. The sycamore leaves, washed smooth by the rain, shimmered with a wet light under the street lights. The air was filled with the fresh scent of earth and grass, which wafted in through the half-open window, completely washing away the unfamiliar aura that Guehen had brought with him. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to the Gu family business, I said. Roy raised an eyebrow. I'm not going to see him. I picked up the glass of soy milk on the table, which had gone cold, and drank it all in one gulp. I'm going to collect a debt. The Gu family owes me 30%, and it's time to pay it back. Rias' lips curved slightly as he picked up the car keys from the coffee table and twirled them between his fingers. The Shin family members are indeed not to be trifled with. Chapter 6. The Beginning of Commercial Domination. The Gu Group's headquarters building is located in the heart of the CBD. Its 36-story glass curtain wall gleaming coldly in the sunlight. 3 years ago, when I first came here, Gu Si-hing took me directly from the underground parking garage to the top floor via a private elevator, without even going past the reception desk. He said it was for the sake of keeping a low profile, and I believed him at the time. Later, I learned that he didn't want anyone to know I existed. Today, I left through the main entrance. The revolving door slowly turned, and I stepped into the lobby of Goose's headquarters, wearing 10-centimeter stilettos. Behind me followed 4 people arranged for me by Uncle Chinho, the chief lawyer of Shin's legal department, and his 2 assistants, as well as a taciturn financial auditor, surnamed Fong, who wore gold-rimmed glasses and was said to have handled hundreds of mergers and acquisitions without a single failure. Seeing this commotion, the receptionist nearly spilled her coffee. She stood up hastily, her voice trembling. P, who are you looking for? The board of directors attorney, Zhao, adjusted his glasses, his tone polite but authoritative. Ms. Chia Yuan, as the second largest shareholder of the Gu Group, has requested to attend today's extraordinary board meeting. According to Article 12, Paragraph 3 of the company's articles of association, shareholders holding more than 20% of the shares have the right to convene an extraordinary board meeting with 2 hours prior notice. The notice was sent to all directors' email addresses 2 hours ago. The receptionist's face turned pale. She quickly typed a few words on the computer, then picked up the phone and whispered a few words. After hanging up, her expression became even more panicked. Ms. Zhao, Mr. Gu said that today's board meeting has been cancelled. I smiled. Cancel. I took half a step forward, resting my hand on the marble countertop. Cancellation by the board requires a vote by all directors, and the meeting minutes must be archived. Excuse me, has the vote been cast? Has it been filed? The receptionist opened her mouth, but couldn't say anything. Lead the way. I pulled my hand off the counter and straightened my cuffs. Or I can go up myself. 33 floors. Right. I know the way. When the elevator doors opened, several people were already standing in the corridor. A few middle-aged men in suits were whispering among themselves with serious expressions, but they all fell silent when they saw me come out. I recognized all these faces from Gu's shareholder list. Some were Gue Hang's uncles, some were old Mr. Gu's business partners, and a few were distant relatives of the Gu family. Gu is ultimately a family business, and the board of directors is full of Gu family members. The conference room door was wide open. Gue Hang sat at the head of the long table, his eyes bloodshot. He clearly hadn't slept well last night. A layer of bluish stubble had appeared on his chin. His shirt collar was slightly crooked, and his tie was not neatly tied. When he saw me enter, his hand clenched the folder on the table, his knuckles turning white. Xiao Yuan. He called my name, his voice still relatively steady, but the end of his voice was already trembling. What exactly do you want? I didn't sit in the seat directly opposite him. I walked straight to the other end of the long table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. That seat was farthest from Gaheen in the entire conference room. Attorney Joe and Auditor Fong sat on either side of me, and my assistant neatly stacked a pile of documents in front of me. Let's start the meeting. I placed my phone face down on the table. Today's topic is only one: the strategic adjustment of the GU Group, to be precise. It's about correcting a series of irregularities that occurred over the past 3 years. Without the consent of all shareholders, Guihen's uncle, a balding man in his 50s, slammed his pen on the table. Who do you think you are? No matter how powerful the Shin family is. What right do you, an outsider who married into the family, have to point fingers at the Gu family? Attorney Zhao calmly pulled a document from his briefcase and pushed it to the center of the table. The cover of the document bore the gold embossed logo of the Shin Group with the notary office's red seal stamped below. According to the latest equity registration of the GU Group, Miss Xiaowen holds 327% of the shares, making her the second largest shareholder after Mr. Guihen yesterday afternoon at 4 p.m. The Shin Group entrusted Ms. Xiaoyuan with the full voting rights of its 18% stake in the GU Group combined. Ms. Xiao Yuan now effectively controls more than 50% of the voting rights. The meeting room was silent for a full 5 seconds. Then things exploded. Impossible. The bald man stood up abruptly, the chair leg scraping against the floor with a piercing screech. When did the Shin family acquire shares in the Gu family? 3 years ago. Auditor Fong spoke for the first time, his voice flat and calm as if reading a weather forecast. When Goose was raising its Series B funding, since Warway Capital purchased Goose shares in batches under the names of 3 subsidiaries. The person in charge of the financing at that time was Mr. Gussie Hing himself. All eyes turned to Gussie Hing. Guy's face was beyond deathly pale. He sat in his chair, looking like a weathered stone statue. Even the color drained from his lips. 3 years ago, he personally signed the financing documents, thinking he was bringing in ordinary investors, never expecting that the ultimate controlling shareholder of those 3 companies was the Shin Group. He spent 3 years digging a pit for himself and then personally pushed me into that pit. No, he didn't push me in. I walked in on my own. And when I walked in, I didn't even know that. Every inch of the ground beneath my feet already bore my name. The first proposal of the day. I opened the document in front of me, my voice steady and clear. Withdraw and terminate the cooperative development project between Goose Group and Shinua Real Estate regarding the North City New. The actual controller of Shinua Real Estate is Linua's cousin from the project's initiation to the signing of the contract. The entire process did not go through open bidding, which violated GU's internal compliance procedures. I pushed a document to the center of the table. It clearly recorded the financial transactions between Linua and Shinua Real Estate, each transaction marked with its date and amount. The last page stamped with the bank's red seal. The bald man picked up the document, flipped through a couple of pages, and his face went from red to white, then from white to ashen. The second proposal. I opened the second document, reclaimed the 2 villas and the Porsche under Linu's name in the western suburbs. These assets belonged to Gu's company and were illegally transferred to her private name by Mr. Gussie Hung under the guise of executive benefits. The company's legal department has the original purchase contracts and payment vouchers, which can be reviewed at any time. Attorney Zhao then handed over another document. It was a photocopy of an asset transfer approval form signed by Guzihin with the date clearly showing it was from last December. At that time, Linua had just found out she was pregnant and Guzihin gave her a Christmas present. Money from the company. The atmosphere in the meeting room froze completely. Several directors exchanged glances, some wiping the sweat from their brows with tissues. The bald man remained silent, placing the financial transaction record on the table. his hands trembling slightly. The third proposal. I closed the folder, looked up, and glanced around at everyone present. Finally, fixing my gaze on Gui Hung, remove Mr. Gussie Hung from his position as president and have the board of directors elect a new president. Gussie Hung suddenly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his rims red as if he had held back a lifetime of tears behind a thin membrane. He stared intently at me, his lips moving several times before finally uttering a hoarse voice like sandpaper scraping against sheet metal. "You're crazy. Let's vote." I leaned back in my chair, crossed my hands on my knees. "Those who support the above 3 proposals, please raise your hands." Attorney Zhao was the first to raise his hand. Auditor Fong followed, closely behind. Then 2 minority shareholders who had been sitting silently in the corner shakily raised their hands. They held a combined 5% of the shares and usually didn't even have a chance to speak at board meetings. But today their hands were raised higher than anyone else's. Next was the vice president in charge of finance. He had been with Gussie Hung for 5 years, and at this moment, avoiding Gussie's gaze, he raised his hand in midair. The bald man glanced at me, then at Guzihan. His lips moved, but he ultimately didn't raise his hand. He didn't vote against it either. He abstained. Anyone who's been in the business world for decades knows that abstaining is tantamount to admitting defeat. When someone doesn't even have the courage to stand up for their own nephew, it means they've already given up. I stood up, picked up the documents in front of me, and walked over to Guzihan. He remained seated in the main seat, motionless, as if nailed to the chair. I was close enough to smell the lingering scent of alcohol on him. He must have drunk quite a bit after returning from the Shin family manor last night. I placed the last document in front of him. Divorce agreement. This wasn't the copy I printed. It was a revised version from Shin's legal department. It had more clauses and more precise wording than the previous one, and the penalty amount was 10 times higher. I had already written my name in the signature section, my handwriting clean and crisp, each stroke decisive and without hesitation. "Guzihan," I said softly, so softly that only he could hear me. "Sign it. Otherwise, after the market opens tomorrow, your losses will be much more than just these." He looked down at the agreement, his fingers gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot as if they were about to burst, staining them red. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something. I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned and walked towards the door, my high heels clicking silently on the carpet, but my steps were steady. Each step was firm and solid. I paused when I reached the door. I didn't turn around. "By the way, I've already transferred the North City new district project to the Shin family. We'll sign the contract first thing tomorrow morning. You know perfectly well how much capital your Gu family has invested in this project." A muffled thud came from behind me. It was the sound of a fist slamming onto the table, so hard that even the cups on the table shook. I didn't turn around as the elevator doors closed. Attorney Zhou whispered to her and Miss Xiao, "Gu's stock price has already dropped 17 points today." Not enough. I pressed the button to go to the first floor. I wanted to drop to 30% within 3 days. The elevator numbers ticked down one by one. My face was reflected in the mirrored wall, my makeup impeccable, my expression indifferent. I was a completely different person from the girl who hid in a bridal shop and cried 3 years ago. Back then, I thought I had married for love, only to later realize that I had married into a one-woman show that I had acted in from beginning to end. Now the show is over. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced down and saw it was a message from Ryu. "The contract for baiting has been signed." The project manager from Goose Group collapsed on the spot. Brilliant. I flipped my phone over and held it face down in my hand, a slight smile playing on my lips. Chapter 7. The Mistress's Complete Collapse. 3 days later, the Gu Family Charity Gala. The invitation was personally delivered to the Shin family by Guihen's uncle. The gold lettering was printed on thick off-white cardstock, and the wording was polite to the point of being humble. When Uncle Chin handed me the invitation, he had a reserved smile, typical of the elderly, on his lips. He said that the Gu family had called 7 times to confirm whether I would attend. I didn't want to go. Spending 3 hours in the same room with a bunch of hypocritical people, eating one bland Western meal after another, and listening to a bunch of insincere speeches would be less appealing to me than flipping through my mother's old photos in the Shin family study. But Auditor Fong sent me a message the day before the banquet saying that Lin Yui would be representing the Gu family to present a charity award that evening. She still considers herself a senior executive at Goose Group. Then I'll go. At 700 p.m. The car stopped in front of the Grand Hyatt Hotel. Rome was dressed in a black suit today, his bow tie perfectly tied as he stood by the car door waiting for me. Everyone's eyes were drawn to him. He extended his arm, which I took, and we walked down the red carpet into the banquet hall. The banquet hall was already quite full. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the entire hall with a golden glow, and round tables were covered with snow-white tablecloths with pale pink rose bouquets in the center. Guests and evening gowns moved among the tables, champagne glasses in hand, exchanging pleasantries, laughter, and compliments filling the air the moment I walked in. The noise in the entire banquet hall suddenly decreased by 30%. Everyone turned to look at me. Some people's hands holding wine glasses froze in midair. Some whispered in their companions' ears, and others subconsciously took a half step back as if afraid of getting too close to me and causing trouble. In just 3 days, the news that the Shin family's eyes had returned to China and publicly criticized the president of the Gu Group had spread throughout the entire industry. Almost everyone present had seen the press conference video. I glanced around but didn't see Guihen. I did see Lina though. She was standing beside the curtain on the side of the stage, wearing a champagne-colored backless gown. Her belly was so large it was impossible to hide. The dress had pleats at the waist, which only made her belly more noticeable. Her makeup was heavy with bright red eyeshadow and lipstick, making her look more like she was attending her own coronation than a charity gala. The moment she saw me, her expression changed, but she quickly regained her composure. She even raised her chin and gave me a defiant look. It seems that the recording at the Shin family's house last time didn't completely dissuade her, or perhaps she thought I wouldn't dare do anything in front of so many people. She was wrong. Halfway through the banquet, the host announced the evening's highlight, the presentation of the annual Charity Contribution Award. The award went to a charitable organization working on a project to support the education of left-behind children. The name was touching, and the PowerPoint presentation was incredibly moving. After reading the award citation in an emotional tone, the host raised his voice and said, "Please welcome Linua, representative of the Goose Group and Secretary General of the Goose Charity Foundation, to the stage to present the award." The applause was sporadic. Lin Yue walked gracefully out from the side of the stage, one hand holding her skirt and the other supporting her stomach, each step both cautious and triumphant. When the spotlight shone on her, a perfect smile bloomed on her face, revealing 8 teeth. The curve of her lips, as if she had practiced it countless times. She walked to the center of the stage, accepted the crystal trophy from the host, and turned to face the guests below. The lights softened her features, and if you didn't know what kind of person she was, she certainly looked quite convincing. I am very grateful to the Gu Group for giving me this opportunity. Linu said, her voice as sweet as if it had been soaked in sugar water. As a woman, being able to work by the side of the man I love and share the pressure of his career is the greatest happiness in my life. A few scattered claps broke out quickly, drowned out by the silence of the others. Everyone present was shrewd. They all sensed the tension in the air. Lin Yue probably sensed that something was wrong with the atmosphere below the stage, but she was already in a difficult situation. She cleared her throat and was about to continue reading her script when the banquet hall doors were suddenly pushed open. It wasn't the kind of careful pushing that opened. It was the kind of sweeping, forceful opening that opened wide in one go. 3 uniformed individuals walked in. Leading the way was a middle-aged man in his 40s, wearing a dark blue economic crime investigation uniform, his rank insignia gleaming coldly under the lights. Behind him followed a male and a female officer. The male officer carried a briefcase, while the female officer held a body camera with a flashing red indicator light. The entire banquet hall fell silent instantly. It wasn't just any silence. It was a deathly stillness, as if the air had been sucked away and solidified. Everyone seemed to have been put on pause. Those holding wine glasses froze in midair. Those eating forks forgot to chew. And even the host's smile on the stage was frozen. 3 policemen walked through the banquet hall, their leather shoes clicking crisply on the marble floor. They went straight to the front of the stage. The middle-aged officer looked up at the stage, his voice not loud, but in the quiet banquet hall. Every word was clearly audible to everyone. Ms. Linu, you are hereby summoned in accordance with the law on suspicion of embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. This is the summons warrant. He held up a document stamped with a red seal, raising it to a height where Linua could see it. The crystal trophy in Linui's hand fell to the ground with a thud. The trophy hit the wooden floor of the stage, bounced once, and then rolled to the edge of the steps, hitting the metal railing with a crisp clang. She stumbled back 2 steps, her back slamming against the stage backdrop with a dull thud. The color drained from her face in an instant, leaving only deathly power and terror on her meticulously painted features. Her lips trembled, opening and closing repeatedly like a fish thrown ashore. I didn't. You've got it wrong. I didn't. Her voice broke into fragments, sharp and shrill, completely lacking the sweet quality she had when the award was presented. The middle-aged police officer, expressionless, took another document from the younger officer and held it up. This time, it was a photocopy of a bank statement enlarged to A3 size with the numbers clearly visible even from 10 away. From March to May this year, you took advantage of your position as Secretary General of the Goose Charitable Foundation to transfer 28 million yuan of charitable donations from the foundation's account to your cousin Shinta's personal account in 7 separate transactions. These funds were originally intended for the construction of primary schools and mountainous areas, but you misappropriated them to purchase villas, luxury cars, and repay personal gambling debts. 28 million charitable donation, a primary school in a mountainous area. These words exploded like a series of thunderclaps in the quiet banquet hall. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Some covered their mouths, while others abruptly turned to look at Linua on stage, their eyes filled with shock and disdain. Several media reporters in the front row instinctively raised their cameras, flashes going off in rapid succession. Linu's face was no longer white, but gray, the deathly gray of someone whose hope had been completely extinguished. Her body slid slowly down against the backdrop, her hands futilely gripping the board behind her, her nails scraping against the printing cloth with a harsh screeching sound. Shinta framed me, she suddenly screamed, her voice so shrill it almost pierced eardrums. I didn't embezzle any money. Shinta asked me to transfer it for him. He said it was bridging funds. He said he'd pay it back in 3 months. The middle-aged police officer put away the summons and looked at her expressionlessly. Shinta was arrested in Macau this afternoon. He confessed to all the crimes and provided all the chat logs and transfer receipts between you and him. Linu's body went completely limp. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the stage. Her champagne-colored gown lay scattered on the wooden floor like a trampled flower. Her hair was disheveled. Her carefully styled bun askew and a few stray strands clung to her sweaty forehead, making her look utterly disheveled. The policewoman walked onto the stage and removed the handcuffs from her waist. The clinking of metal was particularly crisp in the quiet banquet hall, according to relevant regulations. We need to take coercive measures against you. Please cooperate. The moment the handcuffs closed, Linui suddenly began to struggle violently. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, and she wiped wildly, her hair completely disheveled, falling over her shoulders like a clump of withered grass. Her eyes were wide open, her gaze sweeping frantically across the guests below the stage. Say hang! Say hang! Save me! Her voice was completely broken, like a shattered gong. Where is Say hang? Let Ci Hung come and save me. I'm carrying his child. She screamed with all her might, her voice echoing through the banquet hall before fading away. But no one answered her. The guests below looked at her with complex emotions: sympathy, disgust, contempt, but mostly excitement at the spectacle. Just then, the side door of the banquet hall opened. Goose Hung walked in. His suit was still impeccably tailored, and his hair was neatly combed, but anyone who glanced at him could tell how terrible he looked. His eyes were deeply sunken, his cheekbones were more prominent than they had been 3 days ago, and although the stubble on his chin was clean-shaven, his complexion was ashen, as if he hadn't slept for days. His eyes were bloodshot, not the kind of red that comes from crying, but the kind of red that comes from capillaries bursting after pushing oneself to the limit. He walked to the front of the stage and stopped the moment Linua saw him. She felt like she had grasped at a last straw. She struggled to crawl forward. 2 steps, the handcuffs scraping against the wooden floor with a harsh metallic sound. Tears washed away her carefully applied eye makeup, leaving 2 black tear streaks on her face. Sihong, you're finally here. Tell them I didn't embezzle any funds. Tell the police. Aren't you President Go? Just say one word and they'll release me. Right. Gue Hang remained silent. He simply stood there looking up at Linui on the stage, his eyes swirling with incredibly complex emotions. There was anger, regret, disgust, and a hint of unspoken reluctance. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but ultimately no sound came out. He looked away, then he took a step back. The movement was very light and subtle, but in Linui's eyes, it probably hurt more than being stabbed. Her crying stopped abruptly, and her tear-streaked face went blank for a moment. Then her face contorted, not with tears, but with hatred. Gai Hen, she screamed, her voice completely out of control. You're not going to save me. You're actually not going to save me. Have you forgotten what you did to me? Have you forgotten what you told me? You said you didn't love Shuangwen. You said you only married her for her family's resources. You said you'd divorce your wife and marry me when the time was right. Didn't you say those things? The air in the entire banquet hall seemed to be ignited. All eyes turned to Gussie Hang, some in shock, some in disdain, some in gloating, and some secretly recording with their phones. Gussie Hung stood there like a stone statue, struck by lightning. His face was no longer white. It was bluish, as blue as someone who had been publicly skinned alive. His lips trembled violently, and the veins on his clenched fists bulged. But he had no way to refute them, because every word Linua said was true. I sat at the round table in the corner, picked up the glass of red wine in front of me, and gently swirled it. Romeu sat next to me, elegantly cutting a steak with his knife and fork, barely lifting his eyelids the entire time, as if the grand performance on stage had nothing to do with him. The police woman grabbed Linua's arm and pulled her up from the ground. Linua stopped struggling. Her strength seemed to have been completely drained by those few words. Her head drooped, her hair covering her entire face, and she was supported by the police officers on either side as they walked out from the side of the stage. As she passed Guehen, she paused. Then she looked up and stared at him with a chillingly venomous gaze. You'll regret this. Her voice was very low and soft, but I was just in the right place to hear it. Her words were as soft as a needle, silently piercing my skin. Gussie Hin didn't look at her. His gaze passed over Linui across the entire banquet hall and landed on me. He looked at the wine glass in my hand, at the calm curve of my lips, at the composed manner with which Sun Ryu took the tissue from my hand. The last glimmer of light in his eyes was completely extinguished. Two policemen escorted Linui out of the banquet hall through a side door. As the door closed, the hem of her champagne-colored dress got caught in the crack and then disappeared completely behind it. The banquet hall was deathly silent. No one spoke. No one ate. No one drank. Everyone was stunned by the sudden turn of events. A few quick-thinking reporters had already started frantically typing on their laptops, probably eager to be the first to release today's explosive news. I put the wine glass on the table and picked up a napkin to wipe my mouth. She stood up, took the coat from Romeo, and walked towards the door without looking back. I didn't stop as I walked past Gusihang, but he called out to me, "Goodbye." His voice was so horsero it was almost inaudible. It wasn't the affected Zaiwan used in formal settings, but simply Yuan, a name he only used occasionally when he was in a good mood during their 3 years of marriage. I didn't turn around. "Guihan." My voice was calm, as if I were talking about something completely unrelated to myself. I heard every single word she said. I remembered every single one. "If you don't sign the divorce papers soon, you'll be the next one standing in front of the police." A slight sound came from behind. It was like someone trembling, the rustling sound of a suit fabric rubbing against the air. I pushed open the banquet hall door and stepped into the night. The air outside was cool, carrying the fragrance of autumn mannas blossoms. I took a deep breath, feeling as if the pent-up emotions that had been building up in my chest for 3 years were finally being released. Romeo followed me out and casually draped his suit jacket over my shoulders. His movements were relaxed, not like the deliberate thoughtfulness of a gentleman, but more like taking care of a family member he had grown up with. "What are your plans for tomorrow?" he asked. I looked up at the faint starlight visible in the night sky. "Finishing. There's one last step." Chapter 8. The scumbag kneels in public. A week later, Shin's group held a new product launch event. When the news broke, the entire business world was in an uproar. The Shin group hadn't held any large-scale public events for 3 years, since my uncle Shinong Yayan stepped down, and my mother fell seriously ill. The Shin group had maintained a deliberately low profile. Everyone thought the Shin group was starting to decline, including Guihan. That's probably what he thought, which is why he dared to hold Linua's hand and call her Mrs. Gu. At the press conference, he bet that the Shin family was wiped out. He made the wrong bet. The press conference was held on the top floor of the financial center owned by Shin's group, a 120-story building with floor-to-ceiling glass curtain walls. Standing by the window, one could overlook most of the city's skyline. The media area was packed with reporters from all over the country, twice the number of those at the last Gu Group press conference. A row of seats was specially reserved in the front for the heads of major corporations. Within 24 hours of the invitations being sent out, the confirmation slips piled up on Uncle Chen's desk. I was sitting in the backstage dressing room, and the makeup artist was touching up my lipstick. The woman in the mirror was wearing a navy blue fitted suit dress with a Shin family crest brooch pinned to her collar. The maple leaf-shaped platinum base was studded with small diamonds gleaming under the lights. This brooch was the only thing my mother left me. Before she left, she found it at the very bottom of her jewelry box, saying it was the only thing she took with her when she left the Shin family. Romeo pushed open the door and came in, his hands in his trouser pockets, and his tie hanging loosely around his neck. He looked nonchalant, but his eyes were very clear. More than 300 people have come. The media area is packed, even with 3 rows of chairs added. It's still not enough. He leaned against the door frame, a half smile playing on his lips. Gusi Hing is here too. I pursed my lips in front of the mirror, blending the lipstick evenly. I hadn't sent Gusi Hing an invitation, but I expected him to come. Gu's stock price had already dropped 41 points last week. I'd snatched away 3 of the most important projects, and the old guys on the board were camped out of his office every day, pressuring him to step down. He needed an opportunity to see me, to beg me, to try and salvage anything that could still be salvaged. Let him stay put. I stood up and smoothed out the wrinkles in my sleeves. He's not the main character today. As the music began, I walked onto the stage from the side. The instant the spotlight shone on me, the eyes of over 300 people in the audience, like 300 beams of light, all focused on me alone. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat, and my steps didn't falter in the slightest. 3 years of marriage had worn away all my timidity. The ex-Chia Yuan standing here now was no longer the woman who would secretly wipe away tears in a wedding dress shop. Thank you all for coming to Shin's new product launch. I stood in the center of the stage, facing more than 300 pairs of eyes, my voice steady and powerful. Shin's group has experienced a lot in the past 3 years. There have been partings, waiting, and the courage to stand up again. Today, I am not only launching a new product, but also Shin's strategic plan for the next 5 years, a brand new direction that I will personally lead. The large screen behind me lit up, displaying data, charts, and strategic architecture layer by layer. A low murmur arose from the audience. Some nodded, others took notes rapidly, and the expressions of the executives in the front row shifted from curiosity to seriousness. I knew what they were thinking. They hadn't expected that this long-lost heir of the Shin family could actually manage such a grand event. 30 minutes into the press conference, I was preparing to move on to the final segment, the signing of a cross-border cooperation agreement between Shin's group and a top European conglomerate. Romy sat in the far right seat in the front row, a black-covered contract in front of him. He wasn't there as young Master R, but as the executive president of Nord Capital Asia Pacific. With this contract signed, Shin's group would have complete access to the European market. The moment my hand touched the pen, a sudden commotion erupted from the audience. The reporters in the media area turned their heads in unison, and the camera lenses followed suit. The crowd automatically parted to both sides like the Red Sea parting before Moses, making way for a path leading directly from the back rows to the stage. Guy walked over from the end of the passage. He was wearing a black suit and white shirt today without a tie. 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing faint red marks on his collarbone, like scratches he'd made himself. His hair was fairly neat, but a few white stubbles had sprouted at his temples. White stubble that shouldn't be there at his age. His eyes were red, not the red of crying, but the murky red of someone suffering from insomnia, with bloodshot whites. He had lost at least 10 pounds in just 1 week. His cheekbones were more prominent. His jawline had become sharp as a knife, and his suit looked loose on him as if it were hanging on a hanger. He walked straight to the front of the stage, and under everyone's gaze, he bent his knees and knelt down. The knee struck the marble floor with a dull thud. The sound wasn't loud, but in the quiet hall, it felt like a hammer blow to everyone's heart. The entire audience erupted in uproar. Flashbulbs went off like crazy. Reporters jostled and pushed forward, their cameras locked on Goosey kneeling on the ground. Some gasped, some covered their mouths, and some were so excited their microphones trembled. The CEOs in the front row exchanged bewildered glances, their expressions as dramatic as a theatrical performance. Gusahin, the president of the GU Group, the only son of 3 generations of the GU, the invincible businessman, was now kneeling on the floor of the Shining Group's press conference like a dog with its spine ripped out. Chia Yuan, he said. His voice was terribly Horsero, as if someone who hadn't drunk water for days was forcing it out of their throat. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot as if they might burst at any moment. His lips were chapped and cracked, and every word he uttered seemed to come from the very depths of his being. I was wrong. He moved forward half a step while kneeling, his knee scraping the ground with a dull thud. I was really wrong. I beg you, please come back. I'll give up everything. I can give up the GU Corporation. I can give up the CEO position. I'll transfer all my shares to you. I just want you to come back." His voice trembled. It wasn't a faint sob. His entire body was shaking, his voice breaking into fragments. His hands were braced on the ground, his knuckles twisted into an unnatural arc from the force, his fingernails turning bluish white. The reporters below the stage went wild, their camera shutters clicking like machine guns, the flashes making the entire hall even brighter than before. Some even squatted down to take pictures of Guihen's face from below, an angle that captures a person's most disheveled state. Most clearly, I stood on the stage, looking down at him. This angle is familiar. 3 days ago, in the Shin family's living room, he knelt before me in the same way. But that time it was in the rain. This time, it's in front of everyone. The location has changed. The audience has changed. But his posture hasn't changed. Kneeling, head held high, eyes red-rimmed, waiting for me to soften. I held the microphone and remained silent for a long time. Whispers began to ripple from the audience. The voices were soft, but in the quiet environment, every syllable drifted clearly into my ears. Isn't that too harsh? We were husband and wife after all. Hing has already knelt down. Should we give him a chance? That's right. A man's knees are worth their weight in gold. And he's already like this. I turned my head and glanced at the whispering group. They immediately shut up when I looked at them, shrinking back half a step. Then I looked down and looked again at Hing kneeling on the ground. Roll. One word. The sound wasn't loud, but the microphone amplified the word to every corner of the entire hall. Hing's body stiffened abruptly as if struck by lightning. His eyes widened, his pupils contracted sharply, and his lips parted like a fish thrown onto the shore. He probably thought I would hesitate, would soften, and would, like before, help him up with red eyes and say, "Don't do this again next time." After all, in the past 3 years, every time he neglected me, every time he stood me up, every time he used work as an excuse to be with Linu, I had never truly turned against him. But that was in the past. A deathly silence fell over the audience. The people who had spoken up for Gahin earlier were now speechless, their faces filled with embarrassment and shock. Hin knelt on the ground, his hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into the flesh of his palms. His body began to tremble, starting from his shoulders, then his arms, and then his entire upper body. He kept his head down, so I couldn't see his expression. But I noticed a few drops of water on the marble floor where he was kneeling. I didn't look at him again. I turned around, walked back to the signing table, picked up the pen, and signed my name on the Crosper Cooperation Agreement in front of me. The sound of the pen gliding across the paper was exceptionally clear in the quiet banquet hall. Each stroke was clean and crisp. After signing, I put down my pen and glanced at Ryu. Ryu stood up, straightened his cuffs, and walked to the signing table. As he picked up the pen, a faint smile played on his lips, and he whispered something only I could hear. Clean and efficient. He signed it, too. The two exchanged documents and shook hands. Flash bulbs went off again, but this time, the cameras were focused on me, and the logos of the two companies lit up on the large screen behind me. After the signing ceremony, I walked off the stage. Reporters in the media area swarmed around me. Microphones thrust at me like spears, bombarding me with questions. I didn't answer a single one. Attorney Joe and his assistant helped me part the crowd. As I reached the door, I glanced sideways towards the stage. Han was still kneeling there. No one helped him up. No one dared to. He knelt there alone on the floor in front of the stage, the guests and reporters automatically avoiding him as if he were an anomaly who shouldn't exist in this world. His shoulders slumped and he curled up into a ball, his black suit trailing wrinkles on the floor. His hands were still on the ground, but his arms had begun to tremble violently as if he might collapse at any moment. He looked up, his gaze passing through the crowd and meeting mine. I'll never forget that look in my eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was the utter emptiness that follows complete despair. like a drowning person watching the last piece of driftwood drift away, knowing they'll sink, but no longer having the strength to reach out. I looked away and walked out of the banquet hall. The moment the elevator doors closed, I leaned against the mirrored wall and closed my eyes. There was no sense of relief nor any reluctance in my chest. It felt like I had finally accomplished something that had been hanging in the balance for a long time. A huge weight had been lifted and everything was finally settled. The phone rang. It was Uncle Chin calling. Mississippi. We have a message from the Goo Group. Guy hangings. Uncle and the board members are already waiting in the conference room. They said that as long as you give your approval, the position of president of the Goo Group will be changed tomorrow. I opened my eyes and watched the elevator numbers jump down one by one. No need to change it. I don't want the Goo family. Let him clean up his own mess. After hanging up, my phone vibrated again. Romeo had sent me a message with only 4 words. Well done. I put my phone in my pocket and took a deep breath. The elevator doors opened and sunlight streamed into the lobby from the revolving doors, making the entire space bright and warm. I stepped out in my high heels, the heels clicking firmly on the marble floor with each step. As I stepped out of the revolving door, I looked up at the sky. The city sky is unusually blue in the building behind me. Guy Hin is probably still kneeling on that stage. But all of that has nothing to do with me anymore. From now on, my name will only have 3 characters before it. The Shun Family Shin, Chapter 9. The new queen ascends to the throne. 3 months later, in my top-floor office at the Shining Group headquarters, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city slowly awaken in the morning light. The traffic below flowed like a luminous river, meandering through the canyon of steel and concrete, reaching every corner of the city. My phone vibrated on the table. I swiped my screen, and the headline read, Forbes' annual list of businesswomen is out with Shuangwen, the new CEO of Shin's Group. At the top, the accompanying photo was from a press conference 3 months prior, a profile of me signing autographs on stage with the Shin's Group logo lit up on the big screen behind me. The comment section was already buzzing. I glanced at the top voted comments. Some said, "This is a true queen," while others said, "She's radiating light since her divorce." I put my phone on the table and took a sip of my coffee. 3 months. The transition from Mrs. due to President Shin was much faster than I had imagined. The elders of the Shin Group were initially not convinced by me, and half of the board members were waiting to see me make a fool of myself. A rich young lady who had been living away from home for more than 20 years, a discarded wife of a wealthy family who had been invisible in the Gu family for 3 years. What right did she have to take charge of the behemoth that is the Shin Group? At the first board meeting, the CFO slammed the budget report on the table in front of everyone, saying he wouldn't accept an outsider interfering. The vice president of marketing was absent, claiming to be on a business trip, but the secretariat sent me a perfunctory leave request email. I spent 2 months removing these obstacles, one by one. The CFO resigned after an internal audit uncovered an irregular loan from 3 years ago. The VP of marketing returned from a business trip to find all the client data under his jurisdiction had been integrated into the new CRM system, and his original login privileges were frozen. Uncle Chin later told me that he cursed me behind my back as the most ruthless head of the Shin family in history. I accepted this as a compliment. In this position, you can't stay in power without being ruthless. There was a knock on the office door. Rome pushed open the door and came in holding a document in his hand. He still looked lazy, his suit jacket draped over his arm and his tie loosely tied. He sat down on the sofa opposite me, put the document on the coffee table, and poured himself a cup of tea. Our European market expansion plan for next quarter. He leaned back on the sofa, crossed his legs, and said, Nord Capital is willing to invest this amount up front. He held up 3 fingers. 3 billion euro. I put down my coffee cup and picked up the documents, flipping through them. Every clause was clearly written. and the investment pace and expected returns for each step were meticulously calculated. My biggest takeaway from working with Ryu for the past 3 months is that Xinjiang didn't bring him back from Europe to raise him in the West Building as a charity. He was building a trump card for the Shin family. Ryu's business acumen is frighteningly sharp. He only needs to look at a project for 30 minutes to determine its value, and his judgments are almost never wrong. The terms are fine, but the equity distribution ratio in Article 3 needs to be discussed again. I close the document. Nord can take 40%, but on the condition that we are granted exclusive agency rights in the Asia-Pacific region. Romeo raised an eyebrow. Are you haggling with the person who helped you for 3 months? Business is business. He looked at me for 3 seconds, then chuckled. It wasn't the polite, fake chuckle you see in business settings. It was a genuine laugh of finding it amusing. Make a deal. There was another knock at the door this time. It was Uncle Chin who came in holding an exquisite, dark blue envelope with gold lettering that gleamed slightly under the light. Mississippi. This is an invitation to the annual cocktail party for top international conglomerates. The organizers have specifically emphasized that this year's party will for the first time include an award ceremony for the most influential entrepreneur in the Asia-Pacific region. Chin Burnin paused. The award presenter is the rotating chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce and the name of the award recipient. He paused for a moment and a proud smile appeared on his old face. It's you. I took the invitation, my fingers tracing the gold embossed lettering. Sunlight streamed in through the window, illuminating the invitation. The reflection of the gold embossing shone in my eyes like a golden flame. 3 days later, the party arrived as scheduled. The venue was the top-floor banquet hall of the Binhai International Convention and Exhibition Center with an entire wall made of curved glass, offering a panoramic view of the boundless sea. The setting sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, turning the entire seawater golden red. Inside the banquet hall stood business luminaries from all over the world. The men were all dressed in dark suits, while the women's evening gowns shimmered under the lights. I wore a dark green velvet gown with a maple leaf brooch pinned to the neckline. As I entered the banquet hall, everyone's eyes turned to me. This gaze was different from that at the Goose Charity Gala 3 months ago. Back then, they looked at me out of gossip and curiosity. Now, they looked at me with awe. President Xiao is here. President Xiao of the Shin family. Whispers spread like ripples through the crowd. I nodded slightly and calmly made my way through. People kept coming up with drinks, exchanging greetings, business cards, and probing for collaboration. I responded to each one, my smile polite, my words precise, and every question answered flawlessly. The award ceremony began halfway through the reception. The rotating chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce, a silver-haired, blue-eyed German man, stood in the center of the stage and called out my name in accented English. This year's winner of the Asia-Pacific Most Influential Entrepreneur Award is MS Chowan, CEO of Shin's Group. In just 3 months, she led Shin's Group to complete a cross-border strategic cooperation with Nord Capital, opening up market channels for Shin's Group in 14 European countries. She proved with her strength that nothing is impossible in the business world. Applause erupted like a tidal wave. I put down my wine glass, stood up from my seat, and walked onto the stage. As the spotlight shone on me, a scene suddenly flashed through my mind. 3 months ago, at the GU press conference, Gue Hen stood on the stage hand in hand with Linu while I, wearing a mask and a baseball cap, stood in the media area below, like a shadow. Back then, I huddled in the crowd, afraid to make a sound, feeling that my very existence was superfluous. Now I am standing on the stage. The spotlight was on me. The applause was for me, and everyone's eyes were on me alone. I accepted the crystal trophy, spoke only one sentence into the microphone. Thank you to everyone who ever underestimated me. The applause from the audience grew even louder. Some people smiled, a knowing smile, Everyone present knew how the Shin family's daughter had returned. Everyone knew what had happened at the press conference. That sentence itself was a story of a comeback from the brink of defeat. After the party, I took my champagne glass and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sea. Night had completely fallen, and the city lights were reflected on the sea, scattered into countless tiny points of light. Rome walked over with 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to me. "Get me another glass. Yours is apple juice." I took it and took a sip. The champagne bubbles burst on my tongue. Delicate and refreshing. "How are you doing? Are you getting used to it?" He leaned against the glass railing and looked at me sideways. Adapt to what? Stand at the highest point. I raised my champagne glass and gazed at the distant sea through the pale golden liquid. The waves surged in and receded in layers, their rhythm calm and unhurried. "It's fine. It's not cold here. Rome." You didn't speak, but simply picked up his glass and gently touched the rim of mine. The clinking of the glass was crisp and melodious, like the shortest blessing. After the reception, I stepped out of the convention center, the night breeze carrying the salty scent of the sea hitting my face. My phone vibrated in my bag. I took it out and a news notification popped up on the screen. Goo Group officially filed for bankruptcy protection today with liabilities exceeding 10 billion yuan. And the former myth of a wealthy family has been completely shattered. The accompanying photo is of the Goo Group headquarters, building with a gray sky reflected in the glass curtain wall in a deserted entrance. A stark contrast to the bustling scene 3 months ago. I scrolled down, and the second paragraph read, according to sources, Gyuzahin, the former president of the Goo Group, is currently missing and all his assets have been frozen. His former secretary, Linu, was sentenced to 7 years in prison in the first instance for embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. I stared at the screen for 3 seconds. Then turn off the news and put your phone back in your pocket. Rome drove up, rolled down the window, and rested his arm on the window frame, still looking nonchalant. "Let's go." Just as I was about to get on the bus, I suddenly caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A man stood on the curb across from the convention center plaza. The late autumn night wind was chilly, and he wore only a thin old suit jacket over a wrinkled shirt with the collar wide open. His hair was a tangled mess, uncut for who knows how long, and the stubble at his temples was several times more than it had been 3 months ago. His eyes were deeply sunken, the whites cloudy and yellowish, and he was emaciated, like a withered twig that would fall over in a gust of wind. Guihen. He saw me, too. He stood there just across the street, staring straight at me. His lips moved slightly, as if he wanted to say something, or perhaps he couldn't say anything at all. His eyes were devoid of any light. Only endless emptiness and desolation remained. His shoulders trembled slightly in the night wind, and his knees seemed to be shaking. But he held on and didn't fall. I looked away. I opened the car door and got into the passenger seat. The car window slowly rolled up, isolating the cold wind outside from the person standing across the street in another world. Rome didn't ask any questions. He just stepped on the gas, and the car smoothly glided into the night. I leaned back in my seat and glanced at the rearview mirror through the window. The gaunt figure in the mirror grew smaller and smaller, more and more blurry until it was finally swallowed up by the city lights. The car drove along the coastal highway, the sound of waves lapping against the windows faintly audible. The central control screen was lit, and Ryu casually switched to a song, a very old English jazz piece. A husky female voice flowed gently through the car. I closed my eyes. 3 months ago, I was a woman ridiculed by the whole world. 3 months later, I am Chowan, admired by the whole world. This road was difficult, but I made it to the end. Those who once trampled on me are now stuck in the pits they dug themselves, never to climb out again. My phone vibrated again. It was a message from Uncle Chin. Mississippi, tomorrow morning at 9:00. The Shin Group's Global Strategic Signing Ceremony. It will be held simultaneously in Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia. I replied with one word. Good. Tomorrow is another day. And for Xiao Yuan, tomorrow is just beginning. End of article.